We're glad to welcome Sam Barsky, a treasure, local artist from Baltimore. We were lucky, actually, I was lucky to meet him for the first time through Sarah Koenigsberg, who just is joining us in the room, alumnus from last year from the fiber department, who organized a show of Sam's sweaters at Chicago's Cafe, which is just down the street.
That was lovely. That was beautiful.
It was a really beautiful show. So thanks to Sarah Koenigsberg for introducing me to Sam Barsky, and I think, Piper, you had Sam visit many years ago in the fiber department. So we're pleased to be able to welcome Sam to MICA today to talk about his sweaters. Welcome, Sam.
Woo.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sam Barsky, in case you haven't heard yet. I'm pretty sure all of you have noticed what I am wearing today before you notice anything else here. Presumably that's what you're here all about. There is a story behind this. For more than a decade now, I have spent a good part of my life knitting dozens of sweaters. I wear them 365 days a year, and frequently I get questions about them from strangers when I'm least expecting it. You may think I'm some child prodigy, but that is not always how it has been. The truth is, I did not start knitting until I was 24 years old. In college, my major was not art or anything close. It was nursing. But this followed my childhood passion for the natural sciences. But it was not meant to be. In 1999, I dropped out of nursing school while battling various health problems that I didn't even know what they were back then. I recovered from them, but then I faced a long road ahead. With no career goal, I had to figure out what next to do with my life. Around that time, I met the owners of a local yarn shop at a flea market. I asked them how I could learn how to knit. They offered to teach me for free under one condition, that I would come back to their shop often and buy yarn from them. My desire to knit was nothing new. Since high school, I had occasionally played around with yarn on the side. While in college, I actually tried a few times to sign up for knitting classes in various places, but they were always canceled due to low enrollment, and very frequently that was just me. I tried teaching myself to knit from books as well, but I could not figure it out on my own. One thing I really didn't know the difference of back then was the difference between knit and crochet. I presumed that crochet was easier because the tool that is used for it is much smaller. This is a crochet hook, in case you don't know, and this is the only thing you use when you make something by crocheting. Now, how wrong was I? Knitting and crocheting are as different as cars and airplanes, and as you know, to drive a car and to fly an airplane are two very different skills. I hear different opinions on which one is easier, but as for me, knitting is clearly the easier one. And for knitting, in case most of you don't know, this is what you use, along with a few other smaller tools, but primarily these two things, or this. The first yarn shop I went to was Woolworths on Falls Road in Mount Washington. For a few months, I had several lessons, and I learned how to make a basic scarf or a blanket just by knitting the basic stitch over and over again. But then a few months later, I found about another yarn shop called Woolstock in Glendon, which is near where I lived at the time. It was at Woolstock where I told the owner about my desire to make a sweater, and sure enough, the owner told me that she could teach me how to do that. Then, over the next year, I made 2 solid color sweaters. This is actually the very first sweater that I made. As you know, this is called garter stitch, which is very different from the traditional stockinette stitch that most sweaters are made of. It's more bumpy. But the second sweater I made, I did use stockinette stitch in that. But then after making 2 sweaters, I wanted a little more of a challenge, and I wanted to do something with more than one yarn in it. I noticed in the yarn shops, in their Vogue knitting magazines, that there was a subscription card attached to it. It had a picture of map of the world. I really wanted to make that badly, but the owner of Woolstock told me that this was for advanced knitters only, and I shouldn't even try. But I was not deterred. It is something that you can make using a knitting technique that I had barely even tried before that they call intarsia, where you use multiple colors. And I was determined to do that. I contacted Vogue Knitting magazine and asked them about that globe pattern, and I found out some interesting things. Number one, I found out it was very popular, but also I found out that the pattern number was 702. I saw that as a sign because 702 happens to be the minute of the evening that I was bored. So I went and ordered the pattern. I didn't use, this is the pattern they sent me in the mail.
Oh.
And within 5 months, I made the real thing.
Oh. Wow.
And I didn't use the same colors because that was just my personal preference, but I did make it. But when I finished the globe sweater, I was faced with another challenge. What to do next? I looked at all the patterns that the yarn market had to offer, and all of them looked really dumb compared to a globe sweater. A lot of them would be a picture of like an animal, not made very artistically, but with simple graphics on a solid color background. These were the kinds of things I saw, and that wasn't any good compared to that. I wanted to make something more interesting, or at least as interesting as the globe sweater. I was thinking of the solar system, but there was no such pattern. One day I was driving and staring up at the cloudy sky, and I was thinking, that would be interesting, a cloudy sky sweater. But then I was thinking of other elements of nature, like mountains, trees, bodies of water, and I was thinking of how I could put them together. There is something called knitter's graph paper, and the reason why there is because regular graph paper is not really useful for designing these sweaters, because a stitch made by knitting is not a square like you might think. It is actually a rectangle, or more accurately, it is V-shaped, like a V-shaped rectangle like that. So there's special graph paper to accommodate that. But I tried the knitter's graph paper. It was really huge, and it wasn't practical for carrying around. And I like to take my knitting wherever I go with me. So that didn't work. But then I got some idea. I was looking at solid color blocks of a sweater, and I was thinking, when I look at this, I just go and knit along. I don't use a pattern. And I was thinking, why do I even need a pattern? I can just change the colors as I go along. So it gave me an idea. Why not try to draw a picture using some yarn that I have around, freestyle. So I started, this is the sweater I started working on. So as you see here, this was intended to be a waterfall. So these were the first few inches that I did, where it's blue here and white here and gray here. And I had only gotten up to around here, and then someone was looking at me, noticing what I was doing, and thought this was a real talent when I was only a beginner. It took me 2 months, but this is the final sweater that I made. At first, this isn't really a spectacular piece of art, but I knew I had accomplished something. Number one, I had something additional in my wardrobe, but felt I could improve upon it next time. So after I finished this, I got to work on something else. This is what I did it for a second try. I was thinking of the same elements of nature again, this time to make it very green with vegetation. And the mallard ducks that you see in it were mostly an afterthought. But once I had it done, I felt like I had really made what could be considered a good work of art, and I could just keep on doing this over and over again. What else I thought is, since I did this something different. And somehow, by looking at a picture of London Bridge, I got the idea to make a